Surprise, it's me again. Well, welcome back, church. Again, if you're a first-time guest here or you've never been to church before, it really is a pleasure having you here. We're so glad you've joined us. So you've joined us on the tail end of a short little sermon series we're doing called Call Me. It's a sermon series all about prayer and fasting. So last week, Pastor Darren kicked off this series talking about prayer. He talks about how God always wants to hear from us. He's always with us. God is ever present. And not only does God know what's best for us, He actually is strong enough to do something about our requests. Last week, the big idea was this. When we truly grasp who God is, we firmly grasp what God offers. So today, we're gonna kind of side shift into this topic of fasting. Fasting. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Simon, how does fasting fit into this whole prayer picture? How does fasting fit into this whole prayer picture? And let's be honest, does God actually hear us better when we're hungry? Is that what's really going on here when we talk about fasting? John Wesley once said, "The man who never fasts is no more in the way to heaven than the man who never prays." So is fasting really as important as praying? Perhaps you're here and you're thinking to yourself, Simon, you've already lost me at fasting. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about when we talk about fasting. So if you have an outline with you today, simply put this. Fasting is denying your appetite for something for a period of time in order to increase your appetite for God. Fasting is denying your appetite for something for a period of time in order to increase your appetite for God. Now, fasting is normally associated with abstaining from food, but fasting can really be from, abstaining from anything, from social media to your phone, to TV, to sleep, to Netflix, to coffee, to shopping. The idea is that we're abstaining from an appetite for a period of time in order to increase our appetite for God. I'm actually really glad that we get to talk about fasting today. We don't talk about it often at church and rarely ever on a Sunday morning, but fasting is one of the most feared and misunderstood of all the spiritual disciplines. Now, what in the world is a spiritual discipline? A spiritual discipline is simply a human activity that we do that creates a space for God to work. There are so many different spiritual disciplines that we can discipline ourselves to actually do that creates a setting or a space for God to work. Things like journaling, shout out Steps Journal. Things like praying, solitude, silence, giving, and yes, even fasting. These are all spiritual disciplines. But like I said, fasting is one of the most feared and misunderstood of all the spiritual disciplines. When we talk about fasting, I liken fasting to the ugly duckling of the spiritual disciplines, okay? Do you guys know the story of the ugly duckling? So the ugly duckling was big and gray and rough and, well, he was ugly. And then the other ducks, the little cute chickies are cute and fluffy and yellow and a lot smaller than the ugly duckling. And the ugly duckling he was just misunderstood, really. That's the moral of the story. He was misunderstood, and some of the other, pond animals made fun of him and mocked him a little bit. But at the end of the story of the ugly duckling, we find out, spoiler alert, the ugly duckling wasn't a duck at all. He was a beautiful swan. Oh, okay? And it turns out that he actually becomes the envy of all the other pond animals. Fasting is just like this ugly duckling. People don't understand it right off the bat. They fear it, and more often than not, it's just simply forgotten about. But it turns out, if properly used, fasting can be one of the most important and impactful of all the spiritual disciplines. So, you might be thinking, Simon, if fasting is so great, why is it so misunderstood? If fasting is so great, Simon, how come it's so underutilized? If fasting is so great, why is it so feared? And why is it that a majority of Christ followers have either never done it or just have done it very, very rarely? Well, you see, because fasting is a spiritual discipline, it is just what it sounds like, a discipline. Like it takes actual work. But why is fasting so out there? Why does fasting seem so much harder than the other spiritual disciplines? Fasting can seem daunting, difficult, and even painful. And as a rule of thumb, we as humans, we try to avoid activities that purposefully inflict pain on ourselves. So today, what we're gonna do together is we're gonna unpack the joy in fasting and turn this ugly duckling into a swan. Are you ready, church? Yes, we are excited. So, why fast? Why fast? As your outline says, the first thing we need to understand about fasting is Jesus anticipated that we would fast. Jesus actually anticipated that we would fast. Now, Jesus never comes out and commands it straight out and says, thou shalt fast. Okay, you can't find that in the Bible. But Jesus does teach that when we fast, there's a way we should do it and a way we should not do it. Jesus teaches in Matthew chapter 6, verse 16 to 18. And when you fast, don't make it obvious as the hypocrites do, for they try to look miserable and disheveled so that people will admire them for their fasting. I tell you that is the only reward they will get. But when you fast, comb your hair and wash your face, then no one will notice your fasting except your Father who knows what you do in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. You see, Jesus himself fasted. Jesus' disciples fasted, and he anticipated that we would fast as well. So that's why Jesus says in Matthew 6, when you fast, not if you fast, if you happen to get around to it, if you decide that it's right for you, but he says when you fast. As followers of Christ, if Christ's likeness is our goal, then we need to live our life like Jesus lived. We need to set our priorities like Jesus set his priorities. We need to position ourselves the way that Jesus positioned himself. And he practiced fasting as a spiritual discipline. On that fact alone, fasting is something that every follower of Christ should consider. So, why fast? Well, first of all, Jesus anticipated that we would fast. And number two, fasting exalts God to his rightful place. Fasting exalts God to his rightful place. Another way to say this is we fast for his glory. Yeah. We fast for his glory. You see, this whole idea of fasting is not unique to the Bible. There are people from all over the world, different cultures, different backgrounds, different religions that fast for a plethora of reasons. But biblical fasting is all about your motivation. Biblical fasting is all about your motivation. So if you fast for, let's say, vanity's sake, like you're trying to get skinny, you're trying to lose weight, that's not wrong in itself, but that's not biblical fasting. If you try to fast for power's sake, like going on a hunger strike to draw attention to yourself or to rally behind a cause, now that's not wrong in itself, but that's not biblical fasting. Biblical fasting is never about vanity or power. It's always centered on spiritual purposes. Biblical fasting always centers around God and his glory. That is our motivation. In his book, The Celebration of Discipline, Richard Foster says, fasting must forever center on God. It must be God-initiated and God-ordained. So when we fast, we exalt God to his rightful place. Our foundational motivation is always one thing and one thing only, the glory of God. To glorify our Father in heaven and to exalt him to his rightful place. Everything else is secondary. And when we do this, by keeping this as our central motivation while fasting, we make God bigger and we become smaller. We pray big, bold prayers to a big, powerful God. When we fast, it's for God and God's glory, that he be glorified through our sacrifice, through our discipline, through our dedication, and through our effort. It's his glory, not ours. And that's why Jesus says when we fast, not to bring attention to ourselves. And when you fast, don't make it obvious as the hypocrites do. For they try to look miserable and disheveled so people will admire them for their fasting. But I tell you the truth, that is the only reward they will ever get. But when you fast, comb your hair and wash your face, then no one will even notice that you're fasting except your Father who knows what you do in private. And your Father who sees everything will reward you. So when we fast, our primary motivation is God and his glory. It's him, not us. So why fast? Well, Jesus anticipated that we would do it, but fasting exalts God to his rightful place. And fasting also, as number 3 on your outline says, fasting humbles us to our rightful place. Not only does it exalt God to his rightful place, but it humbles us to our rightful place. I don't know if you knew this, but humility is kind of a big deal to God, like a kind of a major deal to God. James tells us that God opposes the proud, like actually stands opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. In 2 Chronicles, God declares, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven. I will forgive them their sins and I will heal their land. So clearly God looks for humility. Clearly God honors the humble. And God even responds to our humility. James goes on to say that when we humble ourselves before the Lord, he will lift us up. Humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. So how does someone go about expressing humility? Have you ever thought about this? Because the moment that you declare that you are a humble person, you instantly are no longer a humble person. So how do we go about expressing humility? See, it's easy to express something like joy because you just do a few fist bumps in the air, you smile, you jump up and down, and it's like, that dude's joyful. And it's easy to express sadness because you just move lethargically around and you cry a little bit, maybe whimper a little bit. and everyone goes, oh, that dude's sad. But humility, what do we do to express humility? It's not as easy as joy and sadness. Fasting is a way to express humility. Fasting is a way to express humility before God because it puts us in our rightful place. Someone who fasts is expressing humility because they're saying no to themselves. They're denying themselves. When someone fasts, they're expressing humility because they're putting their own desires aside. What I want goes in the passenger's seat. That's why King David says in Psalm 69:10, I humbled my soul with fasting. I humbled my soul with fasting. You see, it puts us in our rightful place. It puts us in our rightful place as not the creator of the universe, as not in charge, as a created thing, not the creator of all things. It puts us in our rightful place. It humbles us to our rightful place. Fasting humbles us to our rightful place because we actually have to go to God and ask God for help. We have to go to him and say, I can't do this on my own. Fasting puts us in our rightful place because we have to acknowledge that his help is more important than anything we could ever muster up on our own strength. Fasting, it humbles us to our rightful place because it's a way of declaring with our stomachs and our sacrifice that God, I need you, that God, I want you, and that God, I trust you. Fasting, it humbles us to our rightful place. So let's review. Not only did Jesus anticipate that we would fast, but the central motivation for fasting is God and his glory. By fasting, we are exalting God to his rightful place, and we're humbling ourselves to our rightful place. Has anyone here ever done a juice cleanse before? Hands up, loud and proud. Come on, juice cleansers. Wave it around. Okay, good. Who knows what a juice cleanse is? Okay, not many of us. Let me explain what a juice cleanse is without getting into too many weird bathroom details. Now, a juice cleanse is you drink a concoction of juices for however long, and you just drink juice and juice and juice and juice, and it gets in your system and just cleans you out. That's a juice cleanse. Okay, again, not too many details. You can use your imagination. Now, think of it this way. As a juice cleanse rids your body of junk, a fast rids your soul of junk. Number 4 on your outline, why should we fast? Fasting reveals what controls you. Fasting reveals what controls you. So like a juice cleanse sheds your body of toxins, fasting sheds your soul of toxins. When we fast, it quickly reveals what controls us. We find out very quickly who or what is our master. Who's really in charge? What's really in charge of our life? You see, we get so good at covering up our cravings with food or our phones or Netflix or shopping or whatever it is. And in themselves, these things are all good things, but some of these things have taken control. Our cravings for things and our whims, they've become so strong in our life, we never deny them. If we ever feel anything, we just impulsively go and do. When we fast and we actually say no to some of these things, it quickly reveals what controls us. We quickly realize what a slave we are to our guts, what a slave we are to our stomachs. When you fast your phone, you're going to quickly realize how fidgety your hands become every time you get bored. You're so used to just taking your phone out and playing on it when you're waiting in a line or doing something, and you're waiting for something, you're just bored. And when you fast from your phone, you instantly quickly realize, oh, what do I do with these things? My hands are so awkward. Where do I put them? And it quickly reveals what controls you. Fasting is an opportunity to not only reveal what controls you, but it's an opportunity to surrender that control to Jesus. Now, fasting is no easy task. Fasting takes work. It takes discipline. But like in anything, we know this to be true. I know you know this to be true. Discipline leads to freedom. Discipline leads to freedom. And this is across the board. This is like a life lesson that we all know to be true, that discipline leads to freedom. I don't know if you've noticed this before, but I kind of slouch all the time. I kind of have this terrible posture. Here, you can get an angle of my posture, everyone. Yeah, I know, it's terrible. My wife calls it my hunchback. Anyway, she loves me, despite of my hunchback. So I have this terrible posture, and I don't know what to tell you. It's just the way I am. So I hurt my back playing soccer a few months ago, and I go to my physiotherapist, and I'm at physio, and I'm on the table, and my doctor is working me over something fierce and getting me all up and healthy again. And so my doctor says to me, Simon, what are we going to do about your posture? So I says to him, what do you mean? That's just my back. That's just who I am. That's just, I'm like this. And he goes, no, Simon. With the proper disciplined exercise, you can be free from your horrible disfigurement. I says, pardon? Anyway, so I tried to receive his feedback in my life. And so I said, I don't understand what you're talking about. This is just how I am. Like, this is just naturally how my shoulders fall. And he goes, no, with the proper disciplined exercise, we can free you from that horrible disfigurement. And so he begins to give me a bunch of exercises that I can do, breathing, holding techniques, and stretches, and the like. Discipline is tough. It's terrible. No one likes discipline. And exercise is hard. And so I tried to find a shortcut. So I go online to find a shortcut, thank you, Google, and I ended up buying a bro. A bro is like a bra for guys. You laugh like this is a crazy idea. This is genius. So a bro is like a bra for guys, but you wear it, and it pulls your shoulders in the right position, pulls your shoulders back to fix your posture. I wish this was a joke. True story, you didn't know this. I was wearing this under my shirt when I preached one time. And you might have thought to yourself, Simon, you're looking so dapper today, standing so tall and handsome with your shoulders back. And I feel like a cowboy walking around like this. No wonder they have so much confidence. Wow. Okay, so anyway, I bought this bro, and it was a man's best friend, really. And so I put this thing on, and it held my shoulders back, and to make a long story short, it didn't work. Okay, I still stand all slouched, and I look like a hunchback. Anyway, the moral of the story is this. We know that shortcuts don't lead to freedom, right? It's discipline that leads to freedom. Have you ever in your own life, maybe in relationships, maybe in work, family, whatever it is, have you ever tried to take a shortcut to try to get out of work? Okay, honesty time. I know you have. Someone has. We all have. You've taken shortcuts to get out of work, but we know, intuitively, we know it's discipline that leads to freedom. And this is what Paul says about the type of discipline that he puts his actual physical body through to win the prize. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 27, I beat my body. He disciplines his body. I beat my body to bring it into submission. In the Greek, it says, I pummel my body to make it my slave. Now, it's important to understand, fasting doesn't mean we punish our bodies. Not at all. Fasting doesn't mean we punish our bodies. Fasting isn't about punishment, it's about surrender. In today's world, we've grown so accustomed to our whims and our cravings. By fasting, we're practicing this self-discipline, this self-denial, simply saying, body, I'm no longer gonna be your slave. You can beak at me all you want. You no longer control me. Body, I'm not your slave, but you are my slave. I'm in control of you, body. You're not in control of me. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is a 20th century German theologian and martyr. He says this, we must practice the strictest daily discipline. Only so the flesh can learn the painful lesson that it has no rights of its own. I love that. Our flesh has no rights of its own. By fasting, we're telling our flesh that it is no longer in control. Stomach, you don't control me. Whims, you don't control me. Cravings, you don't control me. Stand back my cravings, stand down my passions. God, I empty myself for you to fill. When we fast, we're saying that we're willing to sacrifice anything and everything to bring God the glory, and to say he is in fact in complete control of our lives. You might be thinking, okay, Simon, this is all well and good. So what? Jesus anticipated that I would fast. Fasting exalts God to his rightful place. It humbles me to my rightful place, and it even will reveal what controls me, sure. But we're talking about prayer here, Simon. What does any of that have to do with prayer? How does this tie into the prayer picture? Which leads me to number 5 on your outline. Fasting gives you power in prayer. Ooh, this is the one. Fasting gives you power in prayer. There's something about fasting that sharpens the edges of our prayer. There's something about fasting that gives passion to our requests. Now, it's important to understand, and this is crucial, fasting gives us power in prayer, not power over God. Fasting gives us power in prayer, not power over God. Fasting doesn't give us a power over God that would bend him to our will. Fasting doesn't make God bless us or pour his favor on us. Fasting doesn't manipulate God into answering our prayers. Let's be clear. There is nothing you can do that it will ever force the hand of God. You see, when we fast, what we're doing is creating a space for God to work. We posture ourselves in such a way to receive from God if he so desires to bless us. Spiritual disciplines like fasting, they work like sails on a ship. Sails on a ship. When you're on a sailboat, it's not the sails that propel you forward, it's the wind. It's the wind that propels you forward. But if your sails are down or they're not properly adjusted, when the wind just starts to blow in, you go nowhere. Spiritual disciplines are like the sails in our relationship with God. You see, when we want to get forward motion, we have to put up our sails. We put up our sails and say, God, I'm just here, open, ready. If your wind so decides to blow in my general direction, I'm ready to catch that wind. I'm ready to be responsive to you, to the moving of your spirit. It's important to understand that fasting doesn't earn God's favor or blessing. Fasting is simply an activity that positions you to receive God's favor or blessing. You see the difference? Fasting doesn't force God to be responsive to our prayers. Fasting simply opens up our lives, our sails, to be more responsive to the working of God's Spirit. Donald S. Whitney says in his book, Spiritual Disciplines for the Christian Life, he says, the Bible does not teach fasting as a kind of spiritual hunger strike that compels God to do our bidding. If we ask for something outside of God's will, fasting does not cause him to reconsider. Fasting does not change God's hearing so much as it changes our praying. Fasting doesn't change God's hearing so much as it changes our praying. You see, fasting gives power in prayer. This is not a power in terms of somehow we have God tied around our little finger and he's our puppet and he does what we want. Fasting more acts like tying a string around your little finger as a reminder to yourself. Do you know how people used to tie a string around their finger? I don't think anyone does that anymore. To serve as a reminder so they can remember things. Fasting is like tying a string around your heart so your heart can remember things. You go through a mental checklist. Let's say you're fasting from food and you get this hunger pang in your stomach and it's like, oh, it's tumbly, growly, it's meal time and you've skipped now, it's your third meal you've skipped, you're at hour 16 and your body starts to freak out and you feel this hunger pang. All of a sudden you go, oh, I'm so hungry. I more go like, I'm so hungry. Anyway, you go, I'm so hungry. And then you go, why am I so hungry? And you go, it's because I'm fasting. Why am I fasting? Because I'm praying about something. I want to bring my request before the Lord. And you stop, you refocus your attention wherever you are on God and you pray for that thing. You become a little more in tune to the working of God's Spirit. And it's all because you've made the decision to deny yourself, to deny an appetite to fast. We also know that fasting, God rewards it. By fasting, God rewards it. And when you fast, don't make it obvious as the hypocrites do, for they try to look miserable and disheveled so people will admire them for their fasting. But I tell you the truth, that this is the only reward they will ever get. But when you fast, comb your hair and wash your face, then no one will notice that you're fasting except your Father who knows what you do in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. Perhaps the potency of our prayers is a part of that reward. John Piper says, God rewards fasting because fasting expresses the cry of our heart that nothing on earth can satisfy our souls besides God. Like we learned last week, that God always is pleased to hear the prayers of his people. But God is also pleased when we choose to strengthen our prayers by fasting. By combining fasting with prayer, we bring a note of urgency and earnestness as we plead our case in the courts of heaven. A way of showing God that nothing on earth can satisfy us besides him. So, let me ask you, church, who wouldn't want to strengthen their prayers with fasting? Who wouldn't want an effective and powerful prayer life? But sadly, very few followers of Christ ever will actually experience its benefits because we choose not to discipline ourselves, to surrender our appetites or submit them to God. We're not ever willing to look past that ugly duckling and see the beautiful swan. Fasting is simply an emptiness of ourselves to say to God, Lord, fill me. We're emptying ourselves and saying, Lord, fill me. It's been said that a full stomach can ruin the appetite for God. A full stomach can ruin the appetite for God. You see, our appetites are all linked. And full bellies, happy stomachs, it can take the edge off of hunger and thirst for righteousness. It spoils our appetite for God. Which brings us to today's big idea. Each week we try to sum up the teaching in one simple statement, and this is it. Controlling your appetite gives God control. Controlling your appetite gives God control. It could be your appetite for anything, but controlling it gives God control. You see, self-denial is not a brand new concept when it comes to fasting. Self-denial is actually at the heart of the gospel. That's why Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, pick up their cross, and daily follow me. Denying ourselves as followers of Christ, this is the norm. We know what it feels like to say no to all kinds of things. Self-denial isn't new, but fasting is a way we highlight this powerful and profound truth. Controlling our appetite gives God control. Fasting has the ability to encourage your faith because it reminds us, sometimes in a painful way, that God is sovereign in all things. We don't bow down to the lusts of the flesh. We don't bow down to our stomachs as our God, the exact opposite. We make our stomachs our slaves. Our lives are not ruled by our cravings and our whims. Our lives are ruled and sustained by one source and one source only, God and his glory. So church, let's get real practical just for a quick moment. How does this apply in your life? Can you think of something in your life, an appetite that you're willing to surrender for a period of time, not forever, but for a period of time in order to increase your appetite for God? Are you willing to surrender an appetite for a period of time in order to increase an appetite for God? It doesn't have to be not eating food for 40 days. It can be. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be going without food for 7 days, not even 3 days. You could skip one meal and have that time focused on who Jesus is and what he's done. It doesn't even have to be food related. You could fast your phone, or fast from Netflix, or fast from social media, or fast from whatever. What appetite are you willing to surrender, to lay down before God and say, God, you are sovereign in all things. You are in control of my life. And every time you get that hunger pang or you want to go fidget with your phone, you're remembered, the cycle kicks in and you say, yeah, why am I doing this? Oh, right. It's to bring attention and glory to God. Not tomorrow, but the next day. It's a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Our church is gathering for 1 hour of prayer. We call it our concert of prayer. So for 1 hour, like all of us together are going to gather together for an hour in prayer. Maybe, just maybe, you could join us, not just for the prayer, but you could fast. Maybe we as a church, like we get 2,000 people all together to say on Tuesday, in 2 days, we're going to surrender an appetite to God. We're going to surrender an appetite to give us power in prayer. We're going to surrender an appetite to bring God glory. We're going to surrender an appetite to humble ourselves and to reveal what controls us. But we're going to do this together, and then we're going to sharpen the edges of our prayers and our requests, and then we get together on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, like, who knows what's going to happen? I'm excited just thinking about it. But who knows what God is going to do on the strength of our prayers? Church, would you join me in fasting on Tuesday? Just super practical. No one's going to check up on you. I'm not going to make you sign in and tell me what you fasted. Would you choose something in your life, something that would cost you something to give up? And would you fast it? And then on Tuesday, we'll gather for a time of prayer. Join us for prayer. Please join us, 7 o'clock on Tuesday. And then we can all break our fast after. We can all go on our phones together and play Angry Birds, whatever it is. We can all break our fast together at the end. But would you join me in fasting and prayer? And we're going to get together. We're going to pray for our city, our church, our staff. We're going to pray for what God's doing around the globe. We're going to pray for your friends that don't know Jesus yet, your family members that don't know Jesus yet. If you've never been to a prayer meeting before at Broadway, they are a good time. And I want to invite you to be a part of that time together. With all that being said, church, I want to conclude. Are you willing to surrender an appetite for a period of time to start to grow an appetite for God? Let me challenge you this week before you go.